This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Baruchim Haboim. Welcome everyone. Shalom Aleichem to the Koilel Agar de Pirka Monday afternoon National Shiur. Welcome everyone. We have a very important and relevant topic, not only to this week's Parsha, but something that could apply to our daily life and our daily Avodas Hashem. A mitzvah that is mentioned in this week's Parsha, and not only is it a mitzvah in the Parsha, but it's one of the Ikarim, certainly one of the most important mitzvahs. It's a mitzvah about which Rabbi Kiva said, Zeklal Gadol b'Torah. It's a great principle in the Torah. When the ger came to Hillel and he said, convert me while I'm standing on one leg, so Hillel said, V'yahavta l'reacha kamaycha. That's kol haTorah kula. The pasuk says, Lo yisikaim v'lo yisitars b'nei amecha. Do not take revenge, do not bear a grudge against the members of your people. V'yahavta l'reacha kamaycha. And you should love your neighbor like yourself. Ani Hashem. Now there are many mitzvahs in the Torah. There are 613 mitzvahs. Nevertheless, we do not find by other mitzvahs that you need to accept the mitzvah upon yourself. You need to perform the mitzvah when the mitzvah arises. But that there's the need to accept upon yourself the responsibility of the mitzvah, that is something that we don't really find. We know that before Kriya Shema, one has to be Macabre, the yoke of heaven. But that there's a idea that one has to accept upon themselves the responsibility of a particular mitzvah, that is unusual. And yet there is a terminology that has been legislated, as we're going to see, that every morning a person should make the following declaration. Hareini mekabel alai, behold, I accept upon myself, mitzvahs aseh, the positive command of v'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. And you should love your neighbor like yourself. I accept upon myself the positive command, you should love your neighbor like yourself. Where does this come from? Who legislated the recitation of this formula? Well, this originates in the writings of the Arizals. Reb Chaim Vital records in the Shar HaKavanos, Koidem sha'adam yisader tefillah beis hakneses, before a person arranges his tefillah in shul, mi Parsha ha'akeda ve'ilach, from the Parsha ha'akeda and on, tzarich she'yikabel olav mitzvahs v'yahavta l'recha kamaycha. One has to accept upon themselves the mitzvah, you should love your neighbor like yourself. V'yichavein le'hoiv kol echad mibnei Yisrael kenavshay. One has to be mechavein, to love each member of the Jewish people like their own soul. Ki al yedei zeh ta'ala tfilasoi kelula mikol tfilos Yisrael. Because by doing so, you will bring up your tefillah incorporated from all the prayers of Israel. In other words, the first thing we need to know is the legislation. The legislation is one should orally declare that they accept upon themselves the mitzvah v'yavta l'recha kamaycha, and have kavanah to love every Jew like themselves. What's the advantage of that? Why do that? So the Arizal immediately tells us the rationale behind it. There's a very important reason. Because by doing so, I incorporate my tefillah with all the tefillos of Israel. V'tucha lalois mala, could rise upon high, v'lasos peri, and accomplish. In other words, otherwise, if I just daven, or even if I daven with a minyan, I could daven with a minyan, but if my prayers are my personal prayers, then my prayer goes up as a island unto itself, and they will not be as effective. But if a person accepts upon themselves the mitzvah of loving your neighbor like themselves, you will incorporate your tefillah from among all the tefillahs of Israel. And it could go high and high, velasois pri, and accomplish uvefrad ahavas hachaverim, especially love for friends. One should engender love for one's friends. In other words, when a person learns Torah together with other people, one should engender love for all the people joining with him. A person has to incorporate themselves, as if he is one limb from among his friends. And then what should you do, the Arizal says? If, let's say, one of your friends is in distress, everyone needs to join up in the person's pain. Or if somebody is ill, you need to join in their distress. Or because of children, you need to pray for them. Likewise, in all of a person's prayers, utzrachav and his needs, utvarv and his words, yeshatif es chaver imay, you need to join up your friend with him. Uma'oid his hirani moiri be'inyan avas chaverim shalanu v'shal chaverisenu. And our Rebbe, the Ari, warned us very greatly about engendering ahava for our friends. So in other words, the Arizal is saying that this is not just like a mystical fulfillment to try to be mechavein, to be mekayim the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'recha kamecha. But there's a logic to it. The logic is that you are jet powering, you're giving your tefillah nuclear energy, because instead of it being just a private tefillah, the tefillah is now incorporated among all the prayers of Israel. Actually, that's interesting, in the Sefer Ar HaChachma, Rabbi Uri Feivel, one of the Talmidei Habesht, Mi Duvanka, he brings a mashal from the Baal Shem Tov, that one time the Baal Shem Tov was davening with a group of people, and they had great feelings of friendship among each other, and the Baal Shem Tov was davening rather long, and they couldn't really wait for him. They didn't have the patience to wait for him, and everybody went on their merry way, and the Baal Shem Tov was left there alone. And after the people came back a little bit later to sort of return when the Baal Shem Tov finished davening. And the Baal Shem said, you caused great separation by abandoning me. And the Baal Shem Tov gave the following mashal. He says, there was once we know that birds like to fly south in the winter. They like to go to warm climates. That's one commonality that Jewish people have with birds. They like to go to Miami in the winter, and in a particular region, there was one bird, a very colorful bird, that raised the interest of the king, and the king told his officers that he would like them to try to catch the bird for him. And so what they did was they all gathered together, and one guy stood on top of the next guy's shoulder, and the next guy on top of his shoulder, and the next guy on top of his shoulder. And this way they were going to climb to the top of the tree and catch the bird. The people on the bottom started getting a little distracted, got a little bored, and they pulled out, they were looking at something, and they started taking a coffee break. And when the guys on the bottom started to move around and sway, so everybody came toppling down. Says the Baal Shem, similarly when it comes to Tefillah, one's respective tefillah is only as strong and powerful based on the combined effort of the community. And if people have feelings of separation and there's a rift between people, then the tefillah is severely mitigated and limited. So that's the importance of being Macabre, the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. Again, it's not just a mitzvah to fulfill when the time comes up, but rather v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha is something that one is supposed to be Macabre every single morning. And the first reason that we're learning is that it gives great efficacy to our tefillah. Now what's interesting is this practice of the Ari is legislated by many, many poskim. Most notably, it's cited by Magen Avram. In Siman Memvav, the Magen Avram brings that when one enters a shul, they should say, V'ani broiv chastecha avay beisacha. And when you come to a shul, you say, V'ani broiv chastecha avay beisacha. When you enter the shul, you should say, beveis Elokim nahalech beragesh. And before you begin Shachris, says the Magen Avram, quoting the Shar HaKavanos, that before Shachris you should be Macabre upon yourself the Mitzvah aseh of Yahavta l'reacha kamecha. And by the way, Chayadam likewise in Kal Aleph Sevav, he likewise says Yikabel al Atzmai lehoiv kol echad ve'echad mimnei adam kegufai, like it says Yahavta l'reacha kamecha, and he supplies the reason that we saw from the Ari, because by doing so, Yichlal Tfilasai Bechlal Tfilais Kol Yisrael. Likewise, Maran Ga'oinu Zeno the Chida in the Sefer Kesher Gadol, he brings before Psuk the Zimra, Yikabel Alav Mitzvahs V'Ahavta L'Reacha Kamaycha. Likewise, the Chida in the Dvash Lafi, which is a type of encyclopedia of concepts, he says, he talks about the importance of being Makabel, the Mitzvah V'Ahavta L'Reacha Kamaycha, before Tefilla, and then he says a beautiful drush on a pasuk in this week's Parsha. We know Ahava is Gematria 13, Echad. So we read the pasuk as follows: V'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. If I supply love to you, Ahava Echad 13, and you supply love, Ahava Echad, back to me, 13 and 13 is Ani Hashem. That's Ani Hashem, that's 26. So through the Ahavta l'reacha kamoicha, through the Ahava that we both show and supply to each other, that brings HaKadosh Baruch Hu down to the world. And just let's digress for a moment to learn the Chida's second rationale for what we accomplish by being Makabel, the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. We know the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, loving your friend like yourself, is a form of chesed, a form of kindness that you display, you show to your friend. And we know chesed is always mamtik, it always sweetens midas hadin, and it turns it into rachamim. So this is the meaning of V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. If you show ahava and chesed, Ani Hashem. Ani is Gematria 61. Hashem is 26. A total of 87. Ani Hashem. Through Ahava, by being Mekayim the mitzvah of Yahavta, by being Mekayim the mitzvah of Ahavas Hashem, Ahavas Chaveroi, that's a form of Chesed. What you're doing is Ani Hashem, 87, and you're one-upping Elokim. You're overcoming Elokim. You're climbing above the midah of Elokim, the midas hadin. So this would supply another reason of why it's beneficial to accept upon oneself the mitzvah V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha in the morning, because you're trying to gain rachamim, you're trying to gain mercy, and by you're trying to arouse the midas harachamim through your tefillah. And one way of accomplishing that is by being mekabel the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. By the way, this is also brought in Ben Ish Chai in Parshas Miketz Shana Aleph. Before Tefillah, one should be Makabel the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha, which again means if you have a friend who's Batsara, you should daven for him. Kaf HaChaim also brings before your Masader Tfilasai, he quotes the words of the Arizal verbatim, and likewise in Siman Chaf Hei Ois Chaf Gimel, he also brings that one should be Mekayim, Makabel, the mitzvah to V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. By the way, the Machzas HaShekel supplies a reason. And he elaborates on what we learned, the reason of the Arizal. He says, if heaven forbid there is discord, it causes discord and disunity between the souls of Israel on high. Mekabel olav l'kayim mitzvah saseh v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. But if every Jew accepts upon themselves the mitzvah to love their friend, v'al yidei ahavasan zelazeh, and through their love yisachtu gufaysein lamata, their bodies join down here, v'goyim hisachtus udveikus nafshesein lamala, and it causes unity and cleaving of their souls above. so then gam tfiloiseim misachtois. In other words, like the Machzas Shekel explains that if down here there's discord, then there's no unity upstairs, and then everyone's tefillah upstairs is separate. But if everyone accepts upon themselves the mitzvah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, if our bodies are joined in unity down here, then we are joined in unity upstairs, and then our tefillahs are also unified as one, and they are much more effective. And therefore, Rabbi Lezer Papo, the author of Pelayoyitz, he composed the tefillah. His tefillah goes like this: L'shem yichud koshabrichu shchinte, harini mekabel alai. I accept upon myself the divinity, alakusa yisbarach, the divinity of God, the ahavasai and His love, the yarasai and His fear. Hu berachmav yita b'libeinu ahavasai v'yarasai lastan love the b'lev shalem. Hashem should implant in our hearts love of Him, fear of Him, to do His will wholeheartedly, so that we should have satisfaction from our descendants. And I accept upon myself the mitzvah of loving my neighbor like myself. By the way, in many Sidurim, they have the nusach in before Psukei de Zimra. Hareini mekabel alai mitzvah sasei shel v'ahavta l'recha kamecha. My Siddur, the Masak Midvash, they give it to you. And then, interestingly, just as an aside, and a friend of mine showed me this recently, then the Siddur of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, this appears as well, that we're used to thinking that there are 6 things we should remember every day, which, by the way, we've spoken out many times, that the Magen Avram says the proper time to remember them is in the bracha of Ava Rabbah. They're actually up to 10 narratives and concepts and teachings that it is important to remember on a daily basis. Number 1, Yetzias Mitzrayim. Shabbos, Yetzias Mitzrayim we remember at the end of Kriya Shema. Shabbos we remember when we say Uzachartem es kol mitzvos Hashem. The Man, Amalek, Magen Avram says you should remember Amalek when you say L'Shimcha Hagadol. Maimed Har Sinai, Magen Avram says when you say V'kerav Tanu L'Shimcha Hagadol Sal B'Emes Uma, that we got Hashem angry at the Egel. Magen Avram says when you say B'Ahava, that we have in mind now Hashem loves us, but when we made the Egel, God did not love us. What Balak and Bilam wanted to do to us. The story of Miriam. The Magen Avram says when you say L'Hoidoi S'cha, you should have in mind that Hashem gave us a mouth to thank Him, but not to speak Lashon Hara like Miriam. Remember Yushalayim and the mitzvah of Kihu Hanoisin L'cha Kayach La'asois Chayal. By the way, the Pardes Yosef brings that a remez that before the tefillah of Shachris one should have in mind to mekayim the mitzvah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha is ma betza. What benefit is there? Betza could stand for Boiker, Saharayim, Erev. What toyelas will there be in my tefillah? Ki naharoig esachinu. If I don't love my friend, my tefillah will only be effective. Ma betza, my shachris, mincha, and marav will only be effective if I have feelings of avas chaveroi, if I have feelings of yahavta l'recha kamocha. And by the way, another remez to this teaching, Reb Tzvi, comes from the Sefer Birchas Hashir of Reb Aryeh Leib Tzins in his Parsha on the Haggadah. Ahavti ki yishma Hashem es koili. He says that Ahavti, when I'm mekayim the mitzvah of avas chaverai, before I start davening, then ki yishma Hashem es koili, then Hashem listens to my tefillah. So this is a remez that before one begins to pray, they should accept upon themselves the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So far, we've learned 2 reasons for it. Number 1, when you incorporate your tefillah among the tefillahs of all of Klal Yisrael, it's much more effective. By the way, I'll tell you a little story. When the Rashbam, the son of the daughter of Rashi, was passing away, he asked everyone to leave the room, and he called his student, and he gave him the following secret. And he said, when you give tzedakah, give it to the Gabbai tzedakah, and then add on a penny, and say, this pruta, I'm giving for all of Klal Yisrael. Or any prayer that you offer, that you don't incorporate all of Israel, is not really accepted. So here this is a tradition that dates back all the way to Rashbam, that one should always perform mitzvahs and do masim toivims, what we say b'shem kol Yisrael, because then their mitzvah and especially their tefillah will be all the more effective. So one reason is your koilel, your tefillah is among all of Klal Yisrael. Reason number two we saw in Chida, it's mamtik the dinim, it's mamtik midas hadin, through v'ahavta, through the chesed of loving your friend. Ani Hashem is 87. It overcomes midas hadin. Let's learn a third maila, a third madre, a third element of what we achieve by being Macabre upon ourselves. The mitzvah v'ahavta l'recha kamecha. This comes from the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, again Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov. He says what we achieve is Kedei Sheyia Tfilasoi Kelula Im Tfilois Shloimei Emune Yisrael Hayoidein Kavanas HaTfila. Here's another great achievement of joining your tefillah together with the rest of the Jewish people. I'm a simple Jew. My kavanos are limited. I don't know what olam each segment of tefillah is. Perhaps I'm not even achieving on my own what my tefillah should achieve. But there are Jews who their prayers are extremely potent. They have very lofty kavanos on every aspect of tefillah. If I incorporate my tefillah by being mekabel the mitzvah of ahavta lecha kamocha, I'm now appendaging my tefillah with the tefillahs of all of Israel. And specifically what I gain is now my tefillah is attached to the tefillah of the tzaddikim and the chasidim, who their tefillah is especially powerful and potent. So now my tefillah is going to be fueled and it's going to go as high and it's going to be as effective as the tefillahs of these Shloimei Emune Yisrael Hayoidein Kavanas HaTfila. By the way, it's interesting, the Beis Halevi on Parsha Vayeshev likewise refers to this teaching that before one starts davening, one should be makabel upon themselves. The mitzvah v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, the Beis Halevi distinguishes between the word ribu and kibbutz. Ribu is needed in an army. You see, in an army, you need a lot of people. Why do you need a lot of people? Because the more people you have, the more bullets that are being fired at the more locations, the more you're going to find the vulnerable area of the enemy, and the more you'll be able to penetrate. But everyone needs to be, so to speak, shooting at a different target. Everybody needs to be sort of a man unto themselves, meaning the advantage of riboy is when you have a lot of different people, each doing something a little different, so in the end, you'll accomplish what you need to, because somewhere you're going to find the area that's a vulnerable spot. Somewhere you're going to find an area that's going to succumb. But if everyone's shooting at the same target, then you're not really adding to what's the difference whether you have 100 people or 1,000 people. Anyway, we're shooting at that target. But the Beis Halevi says that when it comes to tefillah, you need not a ribu, you need a kibbutz. Kibbutz is everyone gathered together in the same place, praying to the same Ribbono Shel Olam for the same need. That is the advantage of kibbutz. And then the Beis Halevi refers to the teaching of the Arizal, namely that before one's tefillah, one should be Macabre upon themselves the mitzvah of Yahavta l'recha kamocha. He says v'zeh mavur b'sifrei hamusar sher koydem atfila yizboinen kol adam but mitzvahs v'yahavta l'recha kamocha. I want to share with you a fourth element and a fourth important maila of accepting upon oneself the mitzvah v'yahavta l'recha kamocha before tefillah. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz brings that before a person stands to daven, he should be moichel anyone who harmed him. and sort of say, I'm not going to take anyone to court, and meaning I'm not going to deal with people b'midas hadin, but rather lefnim mishuras hadin. Doesn't mean I can take someone to court, but you're going to deal with people above and beyond the letter of the law, and to try to remove all animosity, jealousy, desire for honor. Because how could you stand before the Almighty donned in soiled garments? What could be more disgraceful than bad midos, to stand before God with bad midos? And therefore, to be Macabre upon oneself, you have to l'recha kamoicha, to be moichel everyone, to go lefnim mishur sadin, because Hashem deals with a person, midah kineged midah. And if you are mavral midosav and you remove from your heart kas and strife, and you're not going to go lefnim mishur sadin, then Hashem's not going to deal with you lefnim mishur sadin. So that's another sort of important element. By demonstrating love for your friend and that you're going to forego what is due to you, so then Hashem's going to deal with you b'midas harachmim, similar to what we saw in the Chidah, that it's mamtik the dinim. However, he says, if you're going to be very exacting and stand on the letter of the law with your friend, then your tefillah is just going to be a sin. Because then by you standing in front of God in tefillah, God is just going to analyze your record and say you're unworthy. So it's important to accept upon yourself the mitzvah to ensure that your tefillah is not a chait before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that perhaps is a little bit of a different nukuda. Not only is it mamtik the dinim, but you're basically saving yourself. Otherwise, it's perhaps even dangerous to stand before God in tefillah with your review, with your record scrutinized so much. And now we come to a fifth rationale for the Arizal, offered by the Bas Ayin in Parshas Miketz. Bas Ayin, Rabbi Avram of Avarish, Talmud of the Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, he says, Chazal tell us, Klal Gadol b'Torah, v'yahavta l'reacha kamoicha ze Klal Gadol b'Torah. And this mitzvah, says Bas Ayin, is needed for prayer. That a person needs to be makabel the mitzvah before one prays. Why? Says Bas Ayin, the primary hashras hashchina, for Hashem to dwell on a person, the primary requirement is the midah of anivos, is the midah of humility. Meaning, when a person understands that I'm so distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm immersed in physicality, I don't have a panim to pray to Hashem because of my great pchisos. Meaning the main hashras hashchina is when a person has genuine feelings of unworthiness. And how do I dare stand in prayer before HaKadosh Baruch Hu? The only way I could daven, person should feel, is b'soich ami, lost in the crowd, among my people. To be koilel himself among all of Israel, to love every Jew like themselves. And by accepting upon myself the mitzvah v'yavta kamoicha, and judging everyone favorably, then, and joining with the rest of the Jewish people, then a person is able to really, so to speak, get lost in the crowd and engender hashras hashchina and real humility for Hashem to come and dwell upon the person. So the mitzvah of accepting upon yourself, v'yavta l'recha kamoicha, says the Bas Ayin, is in order to accomplish this and achieve this feeling of recognizing and feeling that we are in fact unworthy of davening, and that will ultimately be the greatest way to have our tefillos be accepted. And finally, the Bas Ayin gives another reason why, of the advantage of accepting upon oneself the mitzvah v'yavta l'recha kamoicha before one davens, and that is because davening is in place of the carbon tamid. And when to bring the carbon tamid, it's brought on a mizbeach. And you need to be like a kohen. So, well, if you need to be like a kohen, by the way, that's why we wash netilas yadayim. every morning in order to be like a kohen doing the avodah, because our daily prayer is actually an avodah similar to the kohanim going into the Beis HaMikdash. And we've explained in the past how Psukei de Zimra corresponds to the Heichal, entering the Ulam, and Yoitzer Or is connected the Shulchan, and Ahavarabba is connected the Menorah, and Shema is connected the Mizbeach HaKtoras, and Goal Yisrael is the Paroiches, and Shemona Esrei is the Kodesh HaKedoshim. And therefore, we are in fact like Kohanim. And if we are like Kohanim, then just the midah of a Kohen is the midah of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha, heve mitamidav shel Aaron, oyev shalom, v'roidev shalom, oyev esabriyos u'mekaven la'Torah. Sfas Emes says a beautiful idea. We know that Rabbi Akiva says that klal gadol b'Torah, and Ben Azai says that klal gadol b'Torah is zeh toldas ha'adam. Sfas Emes says the ikar fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs is to do so among the rest of Klal Yisrael, not an island unto oneself. Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. The ikar kedusha is generated when one performs mitzvahs among the rest of the Jewish people. Therefore, we're mekayim mitzvahs b'shem kol Yisrael in order to be mevate oneself to the klal. This is klal gadol b'Torah. What's klal katan? If klal gadol b'Torah is v'yahavta l'recha kamocha, then klal katan is that every mitzvah should be done with all of one's ramach ivarim, ushasagidim. That's the klal katan. The klal gadol is kol Yisrael. Comes Ben Azai, and Ben Azai says, Zeh sefer todos adam. Not only do you have to do Torah mitzvahs b'shem klal Yisrael, you need to incorporate with you in all the generations, klal gadol, kol haneshamos that were kolol and Adam Arishain. When you do a mitzvah, you have to do it b'shem kol Yisrael. You're doing the mitzvah for the Jews of this generation, of earlier generations, of the times of pre-war Europe, times of the Inquisition. Person has to do a mitzvah b'shem the koima shalema of the Jewish people. One has to identify with the entity called Klal Yisrael. And Klal Yisrael is not one person or even one generation. One needs to identify. And by the way, this is one of the important reasons to have at least a basic awareness of Jewish history. Because the highest madrega of avodas Hashem is to serve Hashem on behalf of the entity that is historic Israel, historic Klal Yisrael. The entity of Yisrael from all generations. That's the opinion of Ben Azai. And finally, a practical reason why one should be mechavein to mekayim the mitzvah v'yahavta l'recha kamocha before one davens. Why not before one learns, or any other mitzvah? So actually, we said over from the Rashbam. The Rashbam said, really, whenever you give tzedakah or any mitzvah, you should have in mind that you're doing it b'shem kol Yisrael. But why specifically Tefilla? So the practical reason given by Rabbi Gamliel HaKohen Rabinovich, who's related to the very well-known Rabbi Gamliel Rabinovich, who's the Macabre, he says as follows. He says, the Tefilla in the Beis HaKnesset, especially Shachris, could be a very stressful time. It could bring up a lot of strife and quarreling. What nusach? What pronunciation? Who's going to daven for the Amud? What do you mean you're davening for the Amud? But my second cousin's goldfish's uncle passed away in 4 weeks, so I have to have the Amud. Wow, what are you talking about? My Machatenister's fifth cousin's grandson's nephew. One time, I think he might have died on this day. I'm not sure whether it was today or maybe he's still alive, so I should have the Amud. It could be very, very stressful. And then one guy says, the Rebbe in the town where of my seventh cousin's grandfather's sister passed away 190 years ago from 6 weeks from today, so I should have the Amud. So it could be very stressful. And therefore, before we start the Tefillah of Shachris, we accept upon ourselves the mitzvah v'yahavta l'recha kamocha. This way, we ensure that we have a fighting shot, that the proceedings of the morning will go smoothly without any altercation, that we won't have to call the police department to straighten out any issues at the Amud. So that's another reason to be Macabre, the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. Now, we'll end off with a story, and then I'll give you the executive summary. There was a young man in Yerushalayim who got married, and after a couple of days, he sees it's not working out. Can't get along with his wife. They're fighting, they're at each other's throats, they're fighting like cats and dogs. So he runs away, he goes to a shul in Tveria, and he sleeps there in the night. The Rav comes in, Rav Moshe Kleres, and he says, what are you doing here? So the Avrich didn't want to answer. So the Rav said, you know what, you'll come to my house, you could stay over in my house. Next morning, the Avrich sees, and this Rav, he's bringing his wife a tea to her bed. And every day the Rav, before davening, brings a cup of tea to his wife. So the Avrich tells the Rav, I really can't stay here anymore. I see your wife is ill. It's not right for me to stay in your house. He says, Ma pitom, my wife's not sick. She's very healthy. So he says, why are you bringing her a tea every morning? He said, what do you mean? This is to be Mekayim, the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. If the Arizal says you should think in your mind before you daven, you're Macabre upon yourself the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. So I thought to myself, what, it's enough just to say it? You think it's enough just to say it? Even better than saying it is before I daven, I should actually do it. So what could be better than before I daven, I bring my wife a tea, as the Gemara in Kedoshim says, the main reacha that you should be, V'ahavta kamaycha, is your own wife. So better than saying, Hareini Macabre al atzmi, mitzvah saseh shel V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha, better than saying it is actually doing it. So we've learned today that Arizal recommends, and it's cited by Magen Avram, Chaye Adam, Chida, Kaf HaChaim, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, that one should recite every morning, Hareini Mekabel al Atzmi Mitzvahs Aseh Shel V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. We provided 7 reasons. Number 1, that Arizal said, when you're koilel your tefillah among the tefillas of all of Israel, it is much more powerful. Number 2, the Chida says that by showing this chesed, you're mamtik the midas hadin, and through V'ahavta Ani Hashem 87, one more than midas hadin. Number 3, we saw from the Toldos Yaakov Yosef that by being Mekayim this mitzvah, you're joining up with the tefillos of Shloimeh, Emunei, Yisrael. And you might daven a quick shachris, but there are Jews who daven maybe in Yerushalayim, they daven shachris an hour and a half. I know in Borough Park there's a minyan, a very chashuv minyan, they daven an hour and a half a day. So even if you're not in that madrega, at least have in mind, I love all Jews, so your tefillah will now be empowered by the tefillos of Shloimeh Emunei Yisrael. Number 4, this way your own tefillah will not be sinful, you will not be scrutinized so heavily, because if you love your friend and you're willing to judge them favorably, God will likewise do that to you, and your tefillah will not be a cause of careful scrutiny. Number 5, one engenders the Hashras Hashchina through humility, being among the rest of the Jewish people, which one accomplishes by being Mekabel, the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. Number 6, bringing tefillos is like the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. You're like a kohen, and you want to follow the midos of kahuna, which is to be oihev shalom v'roidev shalom, and we accomplish that by saying Hareini Mekabel al atzmi mitzvah saseh shel V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha, and then practically speaking, to avoid any strife in the Beis HaKnesses when you're together with others, you start off the day with the kavana Hareini Mekabel al atzmi mitzvah saseh shel V'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha. And now we see why this is klal gadol b'Torah. And we learned from Sfas Emes an amazing idea that not only should you try to join your mitzvahs together with the mitzvahs of all of Israel, but you should perform mitzvahs on behalf of the entire historicity, the entire kaima shalema of the Jewish people from the beginning of time. So we should strive to a more fuller fulfillment of the great mitzvah of Yahavta L'Recha Kamocha, about which Rabbi Kiva said, Zekah Gadol B'Torah. Thank you very much for joining today. I wish you all a wonderful day. Bracha v'hatzlacha v'chol tov. Thank you very much.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.